the motive, I want them to behave, I should incentivize that by giving discount for them to do what I want them to do. So that's the logic behind a commercial policy. Who shouts the most gets the lowest price. That's not a good pricing strategy at all. To handle all that, you also have to have very good governance. Who is in charge of price? So we believe that pricing departments are very useful for organizations that want to organize their pricing discipline. And nowadays, you can create a pricing algorithm using AI from Microsoft or Google or those large players for very little money, I can say. I mean, $1,000 or less, even you can optimize your prices using the best of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So why not do it?
Welcome back to the Perpetual Growth Podcast, where we explore the strategies, insights, and stories that help you to grow your business, elevate your relationships, and expand who you are as a leader. If this is your first time here, make sure you follow the show so you never miss an episode. Every week, we sit down with the thinkers and operators who are shaping what modern leadership really looks like. Today's guest is someone who has built his entire career around unlocking hidden profit inside of companies. Federico Zornig, founder and CEO of Quantis Pricing Solutions. For almost 20 years, Fred has led one of the most respected pricing and revenue management consultancies in South and North America. His firm has delivered 350 plus pricing projects across Brazil, Latin America, and the United States, helping organizations optimize pricing structure, manage complexity, and capture revenue they didn't even realize they were leaving on the table. He's a former Johnson & Johnson executive, a Six Sigma black belt, and widely considered one of the leading experts in pricing strategy, revenue optimization, and market dynamics across multiple industries, from SaaS to finance to manufacturing. Today, we're unpacking things like why pricing is the single biggest untapped growth lever in most businesses, what companies get wrong about revenue management, how market psychology shifts across regions, and how leaders can use pricing not just to make more money, but to build competitive advantage. Fred has that unique combination of academic rigor, corporate depth, and consultant practicality. He makes complex pricing strategies seem simple, visual, and incredibly actionable. Let's dive in. Fred, welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you for the introduction.
You're very welcome. Well, Fred, as my audience knows, I always like to open with this, because I think it reveals a lot about who someone really is and how they think. What does growth mean to you right now in this season of your life?
Perfect. Well, growth, I think, has always been a big challenge for us. We are a service company. I could never escalate like a startup, like technology companies do. So I have to hire people, train people, keep them motivated to do a good job, and try to retain them over time, because otherwise I have to start over again. So I think that's a big issue for us. Also, because we strategically decided to be a niche company. So we are focused on price and revenue management, even though I think that's a strength for us in that area, but it's also a limitation if you think about broadening our services. So I'm always thinking on how to grow. And we can definitely grow organically, so we can hire more consultants. We keep doing what we do. Recently, we did two different approaches. We started to focus more on technology, and that's the area that we are growing the most. So we started to develop optimization software, proprietary actually for our customers. So it's not software as a service, but we go into a customer, we define their algorithm, and then we try to productize that through development of a system. So that's the idea. And this part of the business starts to peak now. And the other initiative that we did recently was to expand. So like 2 years ago, we opened an office in the US, still in the early stages. We have to create our reputation in the market, but we are coming. So that's the idea. We have a long-term perspective. And I think we have to have always thinking not today, but growth, you're going to see the benefit over time, like it's the hockey stick. Right? I mean, it goes slowly and eventually, boom, you can really start to speed up your growth rate. And that's the idea behind all those initiatives.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing all of that. I find that fascinating. Talk a little bit more about that, if you would, because I think that, and what I'm referring to specifically is the move into the United States. How has that been a challenge for you at
Mhm.
present? How are you looking at those challenges? What are the opportunities that you're finding in it? And I'm also just curious, like from a not from a place of judgment, but just objectively, how has been doing business here in the US different from your international experience?
Great question. Well, first of all, I think there is some resistance for an entry company, a new company that it's not US based. I mean, we have a branch in the US, but originally we are from Brazil, Latin America. So I think there is some resistance on that. You also are well served with different other options in terms of consultancy firms that can also offer what we do or somehow what we believe we do. We try to differentiate ourselves based on the niche and the specifications of the work we do. But again, it's always a challenge. On top of that, why did we decided to go? Well, I studied the market. Consulting business in the US is 40 times bigger than Brazil, for example, where we have the leadership in the market. So, I mean, I don't have to be that successful in the US to make my business much bigger if I get a few customers. Actually, just to give you an idea, we are negotiating now with one large dairy company in the US that if we eventually close the deal, one project in the US would be almost like 30-40% of my entire revenues in Brazil. So
Wow.
the opportunity is huge. The size of the market in the US is amazing for us looking from outside. So we don't need to be that successful to have a good business in the US. That's how we feel. But we do want to become very successful in the same way we did here, the same way we are doing in Latin America. So that's the idea. And again, long-term perspective, we have to start slow. Actually, when I started my business in Brazil 19 years ago, I was the sole consultant. So I did my first 5 projects myself. So I don't have the urge to start to grow desperately. No, quality first. Let's do a few projects with the right customers, large organizations, complex organizations, show them the money, and then that will, help me move forward to other customers, other projects, and things like that. So that's the idea behind our strategy. We are not aggressive on growth. We are really aggressive on the quality that we do, and then that will lead to growth eventually.
Yeah, yeah, it does. I mean, reputation first. People
Yeah,
like
that's the
working
idea.
with businesses that deliver upon their promises. So that's a great
Yeah.
mindset. I am curious if we were to take a step back, just from a basics and fundamentals standpoint. I don't
Mhm.
think conversations around pricing strategy happen often enough. I think it's almost an overlooked. Um, a frequently overlooked aspect of business that has a tremendous impact. And I think, frankly, at least from my perspective, there is a lot of either throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks in the marketplace, or there is, I mean, I guess it depends on the business model and what we're talking about. But I mean, you can have like a lot of the manufacturer-driven pricing, and you're kind of if you're a distributor or a retailer or something along those lines, you're kind of bottled or stuck within the confines of what that organization does, unless you find ways to bundle and differentiate yourself from other people in the marketplace. If you could, for our audience sake, educate them just a little bit about around like where does your mindset start if you're walking into an organization, and feel free to pick a niche if it helps you get um, more clear on painting that picture. But what are the questions people aren't asking? Where do they need to start? What are some of the thoughts and considerations they need to have? Because I think this is a much bigger conversation than most people realize, most business owners.
Yeah, I think you use a great word. Pricing is overlooked in most organizations. Actually, the way we approach it, we try to think as a process, and a process that starts with strategy. So we start all the discussions with what's your strategy? Where do you want to grow? Or, I mean, which products, which regions, with which channels you want to sell, how you want to sell. It's an omni-channel strategy. That means I'm going to use the same price for all channels, online, marketplace, stores if I have them, or I'm going to differentiate my price, try to capture more value through customer behavior or how customers buy from us. So that's one important piece of pricing, because that's where everything starts. Because with that information, if the strategy is clear, I can then build your best price strategy with that. So on top of that, I have to discuss segmentation. Are we going to treat customers differently, or are we going to treat them the same? How we are going to set our prices? Are we going to use a cost plus approach, or are we going to try to understand how customers perceive value by doing business with our company? So there's a completely different mindset on that. We have to invest in terms of surveys, understand your customers, rather than just set up a markup or a target margin for that product. On top of that, it's not enough to come up with your prices. You have also to go into how I'm going to negotiate my prices with the market. If I'm going to negotiate is one question, or not. It's my price and that's it. You either buy or not. Or if I'm going to negotiate those prices, what are the incentives I want to give to my sales team to negotiate? Most companies also overlook that commercial policy. Usually they say, okay, that's list price and you can get 30% discount. What do you think customers get? 30% or even more if they ask for extra discount. So the idea behind is to try to think strategically and understand what are the behavior I want from my customers in terms of purchase from me. By behavior, I may say, okay, I want them to buy more volume. I want them to buy better products. I want them to buy more frequently. I want them to pay me in advance. Whatever is the reason I want them, or the motive I want them to behave, I should incentivize that by giving discount for them to do what I want them to do. So that's the logic behind a commercial policy. On top of that, you have to have very good data, market data. You have to be very good in terms of analytics. By analytics, you may think about price elasticity, what that means. I mean, how my volume changes when I change my price. So if I raise my price by 5%, how much volume do I lose? Those type of things. And that can be very dynamic. It can be very different by region to another region, and so on and so forth. Not only that, but I have to understand my price dispersion. If I sell prices in different levels, how big is that price dispersion? Because if I can explain that dispersion, that's a good thing, because then it's respecting my strategy. If I see my price dispersion and I can't give it any logic, so then I have an opportunity, because prices are being negotiated by customers and I don't have a strategy, or I don't have a commercial policy, and who shouts the most gets the lowest price. That's not a good pricing strategy at all. To handle all that, you also have to have very good governance. Who is in charge of price? So we believe that pricing departments are very useful for organizations that want to organize their pricing discipline. And finally, but not least, systems. Nowadays, you can create a pricing algorithm using AI from Microsoft or Google or those large players for very little money, I can say. I mean, $1,000 or less, even you can optimize your prices using the best of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So why not do it if it's so kind of easy to do, as long as you want to do it?
There's a few things that come to mind. Well, actually, I want to start here. So one of the things that popped into my head as you were initially starting to answer the question was, you can't be Ruth Chris at Burger King prices, right? Like you're not going to be that deliver that phenomenal steakhouse experience at a fast food restaurant pricing. But there are companies that try to do this, and it becomes a race to the bottom. I mean, they marginalize their products to the point where there's nothing left in terms of operating cash flow or real profitability or revenue. And sometimes people will use that as a strategy early on in order to capture market share, and then escalate their pricing as time goes on. So, I mean, I think to your point, one of the things I heard is what is the actual strategy, the who, what, when, where, and why that this is being implemented. And but then I also have to imagine, and on that same note, I remember I had a coach that broke that down to me at one point. He called it the pricing matrix or something like that. And I'm trying to remember the exact specifics it was, but it was like, the more value that you offer, the more one-to-one hand-holding versus like a group experience versus like, hey, here's a book or a course on how to execute on this. You're typically going to have escalating price points just relative to the amount of involvement, direct involvement that you have. So, I mean, that's one simplistic way to look at it in a service-based business. But then you've got product-based businesses especially when you're dealing with commodities, how I'm curious how are people measuring their success rates and finding ways to differentiate themselves when there is kind of this expectation that you are, or I mean, oftentimes sales standards put in place where you can't exceed or go below MSRP, or at least you can't advertise it or whatever. Could you talk a little bit about how people are actually using pricing strategy to differentiate themselves in the market? Because
Yeah.
one thing I want to add to that too is like on the service side is, there are actually not even just the service side, the product side. Like look at Louis Vuitton, and I mean, and not to say anything negative about these companies. There's just an objective outlook, but it's like, their cost to produce these purses and handbags and things is not really any different than the thing that you're buying at Ross, but you're buying the brand. So,
Yeah.
and it's what it represents and the feeling and emotion that it creates in the buyer. So like that's a great like extreme example of pricing psychology.
Mhm.
But I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that. Like, how is pricing psychology being used in the marketplace, both in product and what difference a product-based outlook and versus a service-based outlook?
Okay. Okay. Two questions there, right?
Mhm.
Let's start with this perceived value that you're mentioning about Louis Vuitton. So the idea here, they use one concept that value is perceived exponentially. So it's not related to cost. It's
Mhm.
absolutely related to how customers feel about your brand, or they perceive your brand. That can be very useful for consumer products, right? But not necessarily for B2B products, where you can also have value, but then you have to be much more quantitative. You have to show what you're bringing in the table for your B2B customers. So, okay,
Right.
and ideas on that. Okay, I can improve your productivity by using my product. So, how much you're going to improve my productivity by 20%? So, okay, what's the benefit I'm generating to you? And on that benefit, I can start to define what's my premium price over my competitor. So that's the idea for the B2B. When we move to services, then price is even more important, because I cannot compare a service before I experiment it, right? So the price is going to show me what I can expect out of the value I'm going to take of that service. Let's think about a doctor. Let's say I need an eye surgery. I'm going to see a doctor that's going to charge me $1,000 for the surgery, and the other doctor is going to charge me $5,000 for the surgery. Immediately, I'm going to say, okay, I rather go with this $5,000 doctor, because probably he or she knows how to do it much better than that other doctor that's just charging me $1,000. And given the importance of the surgery in my eyes, I'll take it. On top of that, is since it's more difficult to compare, it can vary also, because you may have a better service today and tomorrow it's not that great. So as long as you're, I mean, in the high end of the service, you have to have guarantees that, okay, if it does not happen well, I'm going to cover for that, I'm going to repair, and things like that. So it goes all together to make sure customers can be willing to pay the price you're asking for.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating because I think pricing is just one of these things that most people don't think about. I mean, especially as a consumer. And um, there's as I'm listening to you, I mean, there's so much that goes into it. My brain is jumping from industry to industry, from manufacturing and aerospace to food and beverage to your plumbing and electric and contracting and all the things they have to buy through the contract. I mean, you have countless opportunities to help people refine their structure. So I guess one of my questions is if for our audience, like who needs to reach out to you right now to have these conversations around their pricing strategy? Who have the most pressing opportunities, and where do you see the most frequent, I guess the most frequent opportunities for businesses to take advantage of having these conversations with you?
Well, based on my experience, I would say that companies that are seeing their margins going down, pricing can be a very good lever to try to improve what you're seeing. I can give examples like pharmaceuticals. Here in Brazil, they always had a very good margin, and then eventually generics came along, and then they start to see their margins going down, and eventually they start to look at price as an alternative. And they're doing pretty much the same price discounts for customers, all channels, everything else. And now they need to do something better in order to keep their margins in a better shape. So commoditized products, usually they have to have something very good in place. Otherwise, they're going to lose money eventually, since their margins are so razor thin. So they have to think strategically about that. In terms of also retailers, they have a huge opportunity given this machine learning and software capabilities that we have right now. If they're not using software optimization, they should. I can see many companies having a big impact in terms of profitability by using those types of solutions, because they are also with very thin margins, and they can do beautifully if they can separate products that they can make more money, products that they need to drive volume for their stores and things like that. Also, optimization by store. That's beautiful as well. On my experience, most retailers try to, if they use different prices, they were using different prices by state or something, or regions, or based on cost of distribution. And the things goes much beyond that. I mean, you have to understand what's your competitive setting, what's your ABC curve in every store, because they may differ given the profile of customers. You also have to understand who are your customers in each of those stores, which social class they are, how much they buy, and things like that. And that can be very powerful for you to differentiate your prices by store, actually. In terms of structure, usually any pricing initiative has to start from the top. That's how I believe, because it has to be something from the CEO, actually. The person that's in that position, he or she, they have to believe that they need a strong pricing strategy and everything that goes together with that, like I explained before. Otherwise, it may be an initiative from the marketing department or the pricing area, but that may not be that strong, especially if the sales director or the sales force is against it, or they want all the flexibility that they're used to have, and they're not going to comply with some rules that are going to come from a different department or things like that. So the most successful projects we did was a company-wide project that they believe they have to shift gears towards pricing and pricing management, and look more towards profitability rather than just beat the quota regardless the price. And then that's not very smart. That can solve your month, but it's not going to give you a very good long-term growth like you're concerned about it, right?
Yeah, interesting. So, one question I have for you, Fred, on that front is you mentioned the variable pricing by store or market and so on. Now, is that, are there any regulations around that? Like, can that be considered a form of price discrimination, or am I incorrectly using that term, or like how does that play into, or is that specific to certain markets and or products? Like, what does that look like?
Well, the thing is, well, in the US, for example, you cannot, if I have a website like Amazon, I cannot charge different price at the same moment for different customers. I have to, okay, if I'm selling that pen that I have here for $10, it has to be $10 for everybody at this moment, but can be $11 in an hour from now, or the next moment for everybody. In terms of store, I don't have any sort of regulation like that. I can have a strategy that I can say, okay, my website, I have a price, In the marketplace, I have another price. In that store, I have another price, and in that another store, I have another price. Well, it's a strategy, of course, but you may also decide to have one single price for all your products across all channels, and in that regard, it's perceived as a benefit for the customer because then I don't have to look for a better price. If I want to buy your product, I can be certain that it's the same price regardless where I want to buy it.
Yeah, I'd love to have
Um,
you speak on that, Fred. Like if you have what comes in my mind is if you have a manufacturer and
yes.
they've got distributors, be it physical retail stores, whatever,
Yeah.
and they have their own online representation and web portal where you can purchase direct from the manufacturer, and then they have distributors. Sometimes with the distributors, they have stringent guidelines where it's everybody has to have the same advertised price publicly. In other cases, it's more loose. You can set your own pricing as you wish. I can see the benefits and drawbacks with each. Obviously, larger stores, more buying power. They probably are getting better pricing from the manufacturer to begin with. It can push out the smaller stores or startups. On the other hand, when you create consistency, it encourages people to stay in their local markets. I would imagine anyway. And because of that, then they're likely to get better service versus having to call the guy that's an hour and a half away in another competing market. But like, is that a common um, challenge for manufacturers? Like, are they going around and around and around with how they establish the right philosophy and principles to represent their brand and organization? Or like, what does that look like?
Okay, well, in certain markets, they are not allowed. I mean, as a manufacturer, I'm not allowed to force my distributors to comply with the price I want them to sell because they are business. They can do their own decisions, but of course, I can create incentives for them to follow my suggestion. Let's put it this way, but I cannot guarantee that they have to do what I'm asking them to do. So there's a lot of coordination if I want to do a one single price point strategy in the market. I also have to check if in my sector I can do things like that in terms of regulations, laws, and all those things to make sure I'm not doing anything wrong here. If I'm using my pricing hat only, I would say we should try to capture as much value as you can in the market because I mean consumers or customers they perceive value differently. Some people are willing to pay more for what you sell, and it's a shame if I cannot capture that because of any reason, right? So if it's legal to do so, I would go after that extra profit if I can differentiate my prices. That's my recommendation. That's how we act, or we try to act as long as laws are allowing us to do that in order to bring more money to the company. So there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, because you may not be naive to just charge higher prices, right? Because then you're going to lose a lot of market share. It's not that. You have to have the right price for the right customer at the right moment. That's the idea behind price optimization. It's not just increasing your idea. It's really to try to balance your price and demand, and also the moments you need more volume. You may be more aggressive in certain times to bring customers in. So that's an old practice. Let's think about how you used to go to the movie on Wednesday afternoon because they offer you a lower ticket price, right? Rather comparing to Friday night or Saturday night. And why is that? Because given the inconvenience of the purchase of the time, I mean, I have to give a lower price if you want to see that movie in the afternoon in a working day. So that's what's behind the idea of price optimization. It's not only because there's some concepts that, oh, price optimization is just to increase prices. Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. I mean, like a couple metaphors to help illustrate that I heard is it's like pricing is like the steering wheel of growth, not necessarily the dashboard, right? Like we have to be using it strategically versus just reflecting upon it, right? And then another
Agree,
thing,
agree,
another thing I
agree.
heard from you too is it's pricing is really like the architecture of profit because everything is built on top of it. And it's also margins are like oxygen. Like you don't notice them until you're running out, right? So there's a lot of different ways to look at that pricing strategy, and I appreciate everything that you shared. A few questions that I think would be really beneficial to the audience. I'd love your perspective on is, what's one mistake that companies make, or the you see companies making over and over again in their pricing decisions?
Um, I think there are many. One of them, giving a lot of flexibility for the sales team, thinking that, oh, they are going to adjust to the market conditions, so I give them the flexibility to negotiate. Usually, how they use that, they go with all the flexibility they have. Very rarely you're going to see a sales rep saving some of the flexibility he or she received from the company. Based on my experience, if you have, like I said, you have a price list and up to 30% discount, you're going to see the average discount the company does is like 35 because of the extra exceptions and extra discounts that they're required for management and things like that. So that for me, it's a big mistake. And like I said before, those discounts, they have to be attached to some sort of some sort of behavior I want them to change. So, okay, I can give you 5% discount if you give me X amount of additional volume. I can give you another 5% if you give me a different product mix in terms of sales. So you have to have this type of negotiation. Otherwise, it's what they call a zero-sum game, right? If I'm just negotiating price, every cent I give to you, you are gaining $1 or 1 penny, and I'm losing it, and I'm not getting anything in exchange for that. So the idea behind strategic negotiations through pricing is really to create those incentives. That's big number one mistake, I think. Number two, not charging premium prices over your differentiated value. So if I'm better than my competitor, I have to show that in my prices. Let me share one story with you. Let's say that you have a supermarket and I have a supermarket. Yours, brand new, okay, with parking, a great parking lot, a good product mix in your store. You have many cashiers, so you can buy fast and self-services, tokens, so you can pay easily. Mine is old-fashioned, so much smaller, not a very good parking lot, just one cashier, so you have to be in line to pay what you're buying from me. And if you decide to charge the same prices I'm charging, everybody is going to your market. Who is going to come to mine? To get a worse portfolio, a worse service, inconvenience to parking their car. Nobody's coming to me. So the only lever I have is to lower my price. And if you start to follow me again, then who is starting the price war here? It's not me, it's you. Because since you're so much better than who I am, you have to charge for that. And then many companies do that big mistake. They just look at the market, they ignore what they do better, and they say, okay, I have to be the same price of my competitor. No, you don't. You shouldn't. You should never do that. You're losing money. And then you're forcing, worse yet, you're forcing your competitor to lower their prices. And then you're pointing fingers to them. See, they just lowered their prices. What else they can do if they're worse than you? So that's, I think, is the second biggest mistake they do.
There's what I heard there too, or what popped into my mind visually is it's like the difference between the corner convenience store where you're paying a premium for the water, the soda, the bag of snacks, the magazine, the whatever, because to your point, it's quick and it's convenient and I don't have to go through the big store. Whereas if I'm going into a larger grocery store or shopping center, there's a much greater selection and the expectation is that I'm probably going to be purchasing a higher volume. So because I have access to all of these things, so the prices are probably going to be a little bit lower or have additional incentives for buying the volume. Like if you buy 3, you get, this discount price.
But my example is like, okay, we are both a supermarket or we are both a convenience store. So I understand your point, but that was not the case. Okay, I expect to pay different prices if I'm going to a convenience store or if I'm going to a supermarket. But let's compare two supermarkets. One pretty new, The other one, like I said, old and old-fashioned supermarket. So in
Right.
that regard, the better
Yeah.
supermarket should have a higher price
Yeah.
because
Hmm.
they are giving better value to their customers. So they cannot be
Yeah.
competing just comparing themselves to a worse, let's put
Yeah.
this way, a worse service supermarket. That's the concept here. But to your point, what you're saying is completely right. So
Yeah.
depending on the channel, I may have completely different price perceptions, and I'm willing to pay more if I'm going to a convenience store than going to a supermarket. Completely
Yeah,
agree.
no, that makes complete sense. I mean, that's a very objective comparison. I like that. So, another question for you along these same lines is what's one simple action a business could take this month that would improve their pricing strategy immediately if you were to pick any particular industry or market
Sure.
segment?
Well, the thing is, stop selling to customers with negative margins. Stop selling products with negative margins. Take a look on your price dispersion. Try to identify who are the lowest paying customers that you have. Try to bring them a little bit higher, and you can justify that because you're not doing those prices for anybody else. Those are quick fixes that you can try to do it. Usually, you may lose one or another of those customers, but who cares at the end? They're consuming your margin, right? So give them to your competitors. Be happy. Let them be happy with them, given that they don't give you any margins. What else can you do quickly? Well, select a few KPIs in terms of pricing management and try to bring your sales force to, I mean, follow those KPIs. Let's say total contribution margin, profit margins, average selling price by product, and things like that, and try to show them and put them on the spot in terms of who is performing the best or who is improving more or less in terms of those. We have done those in many projects, and sometimes this already solves some of the issues we are seeing. So nobody likes to be in the last or in the bottom in the list, right? So people start to do some initiatives to try to improve where they are.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Um, Similar question, slightly different outcome, I believe. Is there a pricing strategy that that delivers the highest return on investment with the lowest resistance, or a pricing change that delivers the highest ROI with the lowest resistance that
Mhm.
you see more often than not?
A great question. Well, one thing that I believe is that, and we have done that many times. Let's say that you have a product line. Let's think about indexes, that your lowest price item costs like you 100 and the most expensive costs you 1,000. Um, and usually, if you spread out those prices, like let's say now your lowest price item is like 80 and your most expensive item is 1,500 now. That gives you a better chance to be successful. Why I'm saying that? Because probably you're going to be more aggressive in a few products, and that's going to bring you volume, more volume, definitely. And sometimes by being more expensive on your top products, you're going to bring more margin, and they're going to compensate for the strategy to be a little bit more aggressive at the bottom end. We have done that many times, and that gave us opportunity to fill up manufacturing facilities with more volume, and not giving away. I will share one example. I'm not going to mention the company, but was a construction material company. And exactly, they had that index from 100 to 1,000. At the end of the project, we have the lowest selling item at 70, so much more aggressive in terms. Let's give it the entire story. They had three brands, okay, three brands, and they are competing with the leading brand, and they all three brands was like 10% below the leading brand. What we did, we get one of those brands and we position it like 30% below, not 10%, but 30% below the leading brand. And that brand started to bring volume for even other markets that we're not tapping before, from smaller, even smaller companies. We kept the second brand at 10% below the leading brand. So they're doing good there. And we got the least selling brand. We tried to I mean, with a new marketing strategy, we reposition it like 50% higher than the leading brand. And guess what? We start to sell that brand more
Yeah.
than we used to sell before. And why was that? Again, psychology, because that was construction material, but something that consumers could see in their houses or their buildings and things like that. So they value for that brand. They saw the value of having that with their brand in their bathtubs or things like that. So, and we capture a lot of value by doing that. The company, I mean, we fill up one manufacturing facility of that customer of ours, and we actually at the end we had more volume and more margin that we had before. And why was that? We are pretty much three brands, but doing the same type of positioning with the consumer. So we are the same for the consumer perspective. Once we did this vertically new positioning, we could tap different markets, and we won both sides in volume here and in margin with the top brand. So just to give an example on how they could do that.
That's a great example. That's a great example. I really appreciate that. So before we wrap up today, I want to highlight a few big insights from our conversation with Fred. One thing I heard is pricing isn't a number, it's a strategy. Most companies treat pricing as an administrative task, not a growth lever. When leaders rethink pricing, they often unlock margin, clarity, and a competitive advantage. Another is data and psychology equal revenue power. Fred's approach blends analytics with human behavior. I hope you guys are hearing this, because companies that understand customer value and price sensitivity outperform companies that rely on cost plus or instinctive pricing. So there has to be a combination of analytics and human behavior, objective and subjective. And the third thing I heard from Fred is and this is more subtle but important, is incremental changes can create an exponential impact. Like, you don't need to have a massive overhaul. Even a 1 to 3% lift in pricing packaged correctly can translate to significant profit gains without increasing operational complexity. So we don't always have to have a 50% increase. 1 to 3% can contribute a lot to the bottom line. So huge takeaways today, Fred. Thank you for that. I do have one final question for you, and I ask this to every one of my guests. If someone were to describe your impact 20 years from now, what do you hope they would say?
That's a great question. I would like to be recognized by the contributions I did to my customers. I think some of them, they do that to me, actually, especially when we charge success fee for the project. So I can really measure what we are doing in terms of increase their profitability. And also to contribute to the discipline. So I believe that pricing is a journey. The companies need to really understand what's behind it. They need to be willing to do all the changes, because there's a lot of change management in order to be successful. Like I said, probably are going to have less flexibility or directed flexibility. You still are going to negotiate prices if you want, but again, with some rules behind those negotiations. You have to have more a strategic view in terms of how much you're going to charge to your products, how you're going to position yourself in the market. You have to guarantee that the execution is going to happen. Otherwise, there's zero value on that. I remember talking to a customer that they saw as optimization software that we did for a consumer product company. They were also a consumer product company in a different sector. And they say, oh, I want that solution that you did for that beverage company. And they say, okay, but they were ready for that. They had already everything in place. What do you have in terms of commercial policy, strategy, and things like that? And they had none of those. So you have to understand where you are and what are the steps you have to take to really go into that journey successfully. So that's it. I mean, I'm just a pricing consultant. If people really recognize me for that and how I help companies to get more money out of what they sell, I'm going to be happy.
Well, I mean, don't undervalue yourself in that context, Fred. I mean, pricing psychology can save a business. It's real. It's true. One simple lever, that one lever can completely transform the life cycle of a business. So Fred, I appreciate the depth and clarity you brought today. Pricing is one of those areas that I think a lot of leaders underestimate. And you showed how powerful it becomes when it's done intentionally. So, for everyone listening, if this episode gave you something to think about, make sure you share it with someone who's leading a company, building a product, or wrestling with revenue strategy. And if you haven't yet, make sure to follow the show, leave a review, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes with world-class thinkers and operators like Fred. Fred, for our audience, if they're thinking this makes sense, I need to dive into pricing psychology, take a hard look at our pricing structure. How can our listeners reach out to you? Where's the best place to get in touch?
Well, take a look on our website, quantisinternational.com. You're going to see some articles there. We even have books, all for free. You can, well, actually, I have some classes, but they're done in Portuguese. So if there's some Portuguese speakers in your audience, you feel free to go to our YouTube channel, and you're going to see a few classes there as well. So thank you for the
Excellent.
opportunity. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll make sure that we have your website linked in the show notes so none of the listeners need to search for it or anything. Fred and our audience, thank you all for being here. And remember, growth doesn't happen by chance, it happens by choice. We'll see you next time.